Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this special live conversation on the pandemic agreement. I'm Mijail Santos, Communications Officer at the World Health Organization, and I'm honored to be the moderator today for this special session from the 78th World Health Assembly. Just yesterday, countries adopted the pandemic agreement, a truly historic moment that allows us to move forward towards a safer world. It strengthens the way we prevent, respond to, and protect from pandemics. This process was done through the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body, or INB. And today we have three experts that will help us unpack what it is, why it is important, and what are the next steps. Joining me are Ms. Pressure Matsoso, co-chair of the INB Bureau, Dr. Jaouad Mahjour, head of the WHO Secretariat for the INB and the International Health Regulations Amendment, and Mr. Steve Solomon, WHO Principal Legal Officer. So thank you all for joining. And to all of those watching, please remember to post your questions in the comments, as we'll be answering as many as we can. So without further ado, let's start the conversation and let's begin with the big picture. This is a question for all of you, and would be good to get your thoughts on why is this accord of historic significance. So why don't we start with you, Precious?
Thank you so much for inviting us. And of course, this is historic. It's historic because it is the second time that WHO comes up with a legal instrument that is adopted by the World Health Assembly. But it's historic also because it is going to change the course of history, in that we now have a legal instrument that's going to be implemented by WHO member states to prevent, as you said, pandemics, and to ensure that countries can be better prepared and also to respond effectively. As you know, we come from a pandemic that caused devastation. We come from a pandemic that cost people's lives, that ravaged communities, that caused economic shocks. And this is one legal instrument that is going to prevent this from happening in future, that's going to make the world safer, and that is also going to make sure that there's equity. We don't have any public health related instrument, we don't have any global health instrument that has provisions that can give these guarantees, guarantees that we are safe from these devastations, guarantees that equity is a reality. As you know, there was inequitable access, and in this particular case, we're going to have something that is intergenerational. If implemented, the world will be much safer than we experienced during COVID.
Thank you so much. And that is truly historic because we've just lived it, and we cannot forget what we all went through. So maybe over to you, Joad.
Said, and as co-chair Matsoso said, this is a historic moment for public health and for global health security for many reasons. Dr. Matsoso mentioned some of them, but I think the most important issue to remind is this is member state led process. Member states went through a huge pandemic, and they discovered that the world is not well prepared for dealing with this kind of pandemic, and they agree collectively to work as a sovereign country to agree on what they should do together to prevent, prepare for, and respond to future pandemic. I think there is a lot of issues that why this is historic, but in my opinion, this is the big important issue that member states, without external influence, decide to come together to learn from the COVID and to prepare themselves for the future. And this is, I think, the most important issue in my humble opinion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And these countries coming together and showing how collaboration and multilateralism has impact is absolutely key. So thank you for that, Joad. And over to you, Steve.
I can only compliment these explanations, which really capture it, with maybe an explanation from a lawyer, as I'm a lawyer. Because what the pandemic agreement is an international treaty. And international treaties have historically worked to solve international problems in ways that work for every country. So when you look at other international treaties that have really helped, things like the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the other international treaty adopted by WHO, that has had a marked impact on improving lives all around the world. The Paris Agreement on climate change is helping to reduce the impacts of climate change. And the little known treaty called the Montreal Protocol on the ozone layer has solved a problem which many of your listeners may remember from 20 years ago, a hole in the ozone layer solved by a treaty. So treaties, when they are developed the way this one has been developed, led by member states, accounting for the needs of member states, driven by the principles of sovereignty and cooperation, can solve problems. And this is an international treaty which will solve the problems that we faced when we dealt with COVID.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I really like this international cooperation concept because it brings us back to this idea that it really cannot be done. Some things cannot really be done in silos. They cannot be done alone. And it requires cooperation. It requires countries coming together, as you said. So thank you so much for that. And I'll come, I'm coming back to you, Joad. Can you give us a quick summary of the process that took place for this accord to come about?
I think when member states decided to look at their experience on the COVID and come up with solutions, they decided to call for a special World Health Assembly. And this is the second time in the history of WHO that we have a special session of assembly to collectively come and to decide on how to do it. And they agreed during the assembly to establish the INB, the Intergovernmental Negotiation Body, and the INB elected 6 bureau members, and the DG established a small team that I have the pleasure to facilitate to support the Bureau in their work. And the Bureau, under the guidance of the Bureau, we came up with several steps. The first one is to say what we learned from the COVID, what are the key issues that we need to fix, because this is the most important thing. And they agreed on several issues that show were at least weaknesses during the COVID response. And then they agreed how to collect ideas from member states. And the Bureau asked for member states to make contribution. What they want to see in this future instrument? What are the issues they want to insist on? And while we were discussing, another idea came, why we don't consult the public? Because the public also suffered from the COVID. Of course, it's important to consult governments because they are leading the process, but consulting the public is equally important. And under the guidance of the Bureau, we organized 2 public hearings where people, individuals, or civil society represented from the whole world contributed, giving ideas about do we need or no need instrument, but also what if we need instrument, what could be done in the instrument. And all this work was taken together by the Bureau, supported by the Secretariat, and the INB started its work first with an outline, but what could be, and this outline was debated, discussed, and agreed on, and then the Bureau came up with several iterations of the draft that was negotiated and have been negotiated for member states, article by article, line by line, and come up gradually to a consensus on it. Of course, during all this process, things were not always easy. Sometimes they were complicated, but I think the wisdom of countries, guided by the whole Bureau, allow countries to come and agree on a text that was presented to the Assembly and approved. Of course, this is very, very short summary on the process, But it will take me too long time to explain all the details. But other colleagues may complement things that I forgot.
Let me end. I think the summary is actually accurate. But what stands out for me with regard to this process is that in most treaty making processes that Steve will probably know much better, you actually pull the best legal minds, the best experts, they start the preliminary work and so on. But in this particular case, which is what Jaouad is describing, we had to start on a clean sheet. There was no document that was written that we pulled from somewhere. It was clean sheet and a pen. So what Jaouad was describing is member states, based on their experiences, based on what they went through during COVID, had to reflect and determine the elements that had to be included. And even though we went through a scientific way in collecting ideas of member states, they also had to reflect because they had gone through this very difficult experience. They had lost loved ones, their livelihoods were ravaged. So because of that, the whatever they included had to be reflective of their lived experiences. And I think Dr. Jaouad captures that very well.
Thank you so much for that. And uh, you're talking a lot about how the experiences of people were taken into account also to draft this, and how it is important that that different stakeholders were involved. And actually, that's a reminder to all of our viewers to post question. We have the experts who were leading this process, and you have the opportunity to ask questions on how that impacts you. Anything you'd like to know more about the pandemic agreement.
And perhaps maybe just to add, and based on what Jaouad was saying about the fact that it was led by member states themselves. There's a misunderstanding about WHO, and I think that Dr. Jaouad will explain how WHO works and so on. The sovereignty of member states is extremely important, and nobody instructs member states what to do. Nobody tells them what to do. So even within what we did as the Bureau, with the support of the Secretariat, there was no instruction coming from above or from elsewhere. It was all determined by them collectively.
Yeah.
And it's a very important principle. It's extremely important that people understand that no particular country was bullied by anyone into this process. No country was forced into any process. They all did this work collectively, voluntarily, and also within the confines of their national laws.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think that's absolutely important to highlight how sovereign countries came together and come about with this agreement in their capacity of sovereign member states, right? So thank you so much for that. And actually, I'm going to go to you, Steve, with one question on what were some of the most contentious issues during the negotiations, and how did parties reach consensus?
Big question, obviously. You can have a whole separate seminar on this subject. But I think some of the big questions were just overall finding balance. Remember, a treaty is a contract. It's a contract between countries. Countries are exchanging commitments with each other. And so they need to find balance in those commitments. But where they were able to find balance in very difficult areas were on issues like the sharing of pathogens and the sharing of the benefits that come from those pathogens. This means vaccines and countermeasures, therapeutics, diagnostics will be shared equitably, fairly, based on need. And this is a very important area where balance was found. More work needs to be done on that. On the areas of intellectual property, difficult area, but balance was found in that area. And on many, many other areas, and I'm sure my colleagues can go into it, but really it is a process of finding balance and striking that balance in a way that works for all countries is not easy. What was remarkable about this achievement, led by Precious and the other members, the other officers, Bureau, was that balance was achieved in each of the most sensitive areas.
Maybe just to add that, I think the disagreement were about how to do things, not about the what, but about the how. If you take an example of tech transfer, since day one in the outline, they agreed that should be in the text. But how to do it, this is where we had the different views. But on the what, there was no disagreement in general. The same in the access and benefit sharing, nobody says no. But how to do it, sometimes member states differ on how to do it.
So the what was the reason why the intergovernmental negotiating body came together. The how is what you were challenged to come up with, and that's why it's such an important process that took I think over 3 years of negotiations, meetings, and which you've summarized pretty well. But that's the importance, and that's how inclusive, how relevant it is for people. And in fact, that's the next question that I wanna put forward to the three of you as well, and that is if as a regular individual that's not involved in health diplomacy, how is this going to affect me in the future, or what is the impact that a pandemic agreement has on me? We can start with you, Steve, maybe.
Well, I think it's very important to say at the outset that what this agreement won't do. This agreement does not make WHO the boss of anyone or any country. WHO is not the boss. Countries are their own boss, if you will. WHO only makes recommendations. It gives advice. The advice doesn't bind any country, doesn't bind any individual. So countries will work together to figure out how to develop all these areas that we've been talking out based on the agreements in the pandemic agreement. And this point, I think, is really fundamental, that it is WHO supporting member states, WHO, and it's written into the agreement, does not order, it only makes recommendations.
Thank you so much.
Well, as a citizen, I would want to know that my safety is guaranteed. If there's an outbreak in my country, I'll be safe. And I think this is what is intended, that in the event there's an outbreak, I should be able to travel. I should be able to, interact with others. As you know, there was social distancing. So these things, much as they are global issues, there are certain things that apply to individuals directly, and it's those guarantees actually that people must feel safe. This is what it guarantees, that in the we need to be ensured that we are safe in the event that the next pandemic happens. At least we'll be much safer, more safer than we were before. I also want to ensure that I will not have to wait long for a vaccine.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be told that, hey, we're not sure when these vaccines are gonna come. If disaster strikes, I should at least know that it will not take long for me to get whether vaccines or therapeutics, and that I'll be told what I suffer from. So those kind of tools must be available. But I also want to ensure that the health workers that look after us are also protected, because if they are not, who's going to look after us?
Yeah.
So those things are extremely important, and I think this agreement, to a certain extent, deals with those issues. And I'm simplifying them so that people can see that it's not something that is too complex, technical. It also relates to our day-to-day lives.
Maybe one small things. I think what's happened yesterday is historic in nature because it's bring countries to work together and agree on a global framework to prevent, prepare for, and respond to pandemic. And next step, when the signature starts and the ratification starts, the same debate that's happened 3 years ago will happen in the country level. And at the country level, through the parliament and the representative institution, this dialogue will happen. And individuals, either directly or through their communities, through their representatives, with the government, with the private sector, will agree on what is the best way to implement this agreement, what are the national priorities, and everybody will have a say how to implement prevention, preparedness, and response for a pandemic. In my humble opinion, this is the most important part because we, all of us agree that the world will not prepare if there is only one country who will not prepare. And this national debate will allow individuals to contribute to their priorities and select what is good for their country, taking consideration their national priorities and circumstances.
Thank you so much for that. And I will continue with some of these questions, but I want to add also some of the comments that we're getting on social media and through our viewers. Some of them saying, happy to see a woman in power representing and giving insightful and impactful contributions. There are a few questions. I'm going to go for one. I noticed there is a section devoted to material acquisition for pandemic resources. Is there any sort of oversight in regards to what those resources are and any safeguards to prevent abuse of the system? This is from Tim Harbison. Anyone that could take this?
The
So,
question,
is
sorry
there
for
any
that.
sort of oversight in regards to material acquisition, um, uh, and oversight to what those resources are, and safeguard to prevent the abuse of the system in terms of material acquisition
No, I
or
think
resource?
one of the elements that the agreement with member states agree in the agreement is to establish a global network to for supply and logistic issues. The role of this mechanism is to help countries to get access to countermeasures, either to diagnostic, to vaccine, medicines, PPEs, or other issues. Because some countries they don't have capacity to do it, and they agree to come together to establish mechanisms that can do it on their behalf. But the good news is this mechanism is operating under the oversight and the control of member states themselves. Nobody has any oversight on them. If I understood very well the question, this is my response. But
I can probably add, I mean, if you look at how the pandemic agreement has been put together, in the preamble, it actually states some of the broader principles of accountability, transparency, but it also states what the obligations of member states are. But what I like is that with the establishment of some institutional arrangements in the form of the um, uh, conference of parties, there is some reporting framework so that in that process of reporting, we can also state uh, what is it that countries are doing, because it's not about the use of resources only. It's also about implementation. The countries themselves, through the conference of parties, must at least ensure there's some accountability mechanisms to ensure there's implementation, but also resources are accounted for. And there's a proposal for establishment of coordinating a financial mechanism. And that comes with procedural elements, especially of accounting. You don't just get a system where money is allocated and there's no system of accountability. You don't get a system where you make supplies available and nobody accounts for them. So I think those safeguards will be threshed out again when the conference of parties is established, but the key elements and broader thematic areas are enshrined in this document.
Thank you so much. Just one more comment from online, and then I'll come back hopefully to a couple of questions. So, from Hannah Moandoloma, as an individual who is not involved in health policy, I'm pleased to hear that WHO does not play as the boss in the pandemic agreement, but rather the body that gives recommendations. Do you have any reaction to this comment?
Well, we really appreciate the comment because your listener, your viewer, has understood really well what how WHO operates. We're an organization of countries, and countries make the decisions, and countries make their own laws, and countries will consider this, as Jaouad has said, because the first step in the process is what happened here at the Health Assembly. The representatives of the countries adopted it, but after soon it will go back to the countries and each country will decide. It further underscores how WHO is not the boss. WHO is there for advice. And by the way, I would say for advice that we try as hard as possible to make impartial, neutral, and based on science and based on evidence. And that's what we, WHO, are here for. And then member states take that and they make the decisions.
Thank you so much. And I think that's key. And one of the areas that we really need to highlight is that WHO is fulfilling its mandate given by member states, given by countries, and that is to provide recommendations. It's not the other way around. It's not WHO telling countries what to do, but countries coming together through WHO. So that is very very helpful. Yeah, please.
The decision that was taken by member state during the special assembly to establish the intergovernmental negotiating body include a request to the DG. The member state themselves asked the DG what to do to support this process. And it would define in terms of supporting the member state in meeting, providing technical advice, and that's it. Even the role of the DG or of the organization was defined by the member state themselves.
That's I think that's very helpful, and hope that, that clarifies the questions and the comments online. So you've spoken a little bit of the next steps now that the assembly has adopted the pandemic agreement. So now it goes to countries. But is there any other nuance that our viewers would benefit from in terms of what's next? I think everyone's looking at you, Precious.
Well, I think the first thing is you'll realize that there's been a recognition that there's some work that is quite intensive that had to be undertaken. But the first step was the adoption, and which has happened. Member states have adopted the pandemic agreement. But then the other piece of work that has to unfold is that of developing an instrument that goes hand in glove with the pandemic agreement. And that instrument is established in terms of Article 12, and it is about pathogen access and benefit sharing. This is one aspect. Now, the actual coming into force of this pandemic agreement will not happen until this work on the instrument is completed. The second is that preparatory work has to happen. So before signature, because you need a threshold of countries, there must be about 60 of them that sign and say yes. Before that happens, you must do preparatory work. And preparatory work means all the procedural requirements, administrative issues need to be put together, ready, so that when the conference of party is established, must hit the ground running. Now, all of that work must unfold. Of course, there are a few other technical areas which I'll hand over to Dr. Jaouad to explain better.
Yeah, I think I agree with Precious. Agreeing on the PAP system is a key, and after this agreement adoption in the assembly, the signature of the ratification will start, and this is what member states agreed to do. But also they agreed also that member states themselves should start putting the element to be ready when the signature and the ratification start, they can be ready. Also, the yesterday member state in the resolution they adopted, they requested the DG to start helping countries based on the request to be prepared for the ratification of the process. I think these are key elements. One element that maybe is also important to highlight here. Yesterday, member states agreed that if a pandemic happened before the entry in force of this agreement, they they urges member states to implement the provision of this agreement on voluntary basis to face the pandemic. Of course, we hope that we'll not have a pandemic that soon, but I think we need always to prepare for the worst. And member states, in their wisdom, agreed yesterday to voluntarily implement the provision of the treaty if a pandemic happened before the entry in force.
Anything? All right. Well, this is, I'm going to take this kind of closing statements from each one of you, but specifically addressing young people who are watching us today. So, in a few sentences, what should the next generation hope for from this agreement success? So, we can maybe start with you, Steve.
I really like the question because it really goes to what this agreement really is, which is a promise to future generations, especially to be safer. And I think I would take away this, that, you know, if during COVID, if the vaccines and the therapeutics and the diagnostics of COVID were distributed based on health needs, on health risks, many lives would have been saved. Many illnesses would have been avoided and more limited. If instead those necessary important medicines are distributed based on issues of profit and geopolitics, we're going to repeat the same problems we had with COVID. What this agreement does, especially, is it says that future access and future distribution of medicines to deal with the next pandemic are going to be distributed based on public health risk and need. And that's a critical element to ensuring the safety of everyone, whether they're young people or young parents, or they have older parents. This is for families, for everyone, the guarantee that there'll be better access, better distribution, more fair, more equitable in the future.
Jaouad?
I think for those who attended the adoption yesterday, they heard the youth speaking about what they want. I think my humble advice is to go to the statement and look what in them, and we have a clear roadmap how to implement this. And my hope is that the youth are consulted during the national processes because they know what they want and they know what they expect for their future. And really, to be frank, yesterday I was humbled by these youth interventions.
It was great to hear those youth voices coming and reacting to this great historic moment, right? Precious.
Well, this agreement is a seed that is planted for a tree that will serve as a shade for youth. They will use this. Today, it's a seed is planted. It will be a tree, it will grow, but you won't be there to enjoy the shade. It will be youth that will be enjoying the shade. So it is for that reason that it's important that they should be part of this. They should be the ones bringing the fertilizer to the seeds. They are the ones who water the seeds. And it's for that reason that their involvement, and I agree with Jaouad that, it's humbling to hear youth saying, we want it. And saying they want it is because it is about them. They are the ones who are going to establish whether it works or not. And it's better if they're part of this process now, not later.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being part of this conversation, first of all, but also for all the work that has gone through. And congratulations, really, for such a milestone in global health. And thank you also to all our viewers who have joined us today, who have sent us questions. To me, this conversation has made one thing clear, and that is that the pandemic agreement is a victory for global health, is a victory for equity, is a victory for sovereignty. And it is now in our hands to continue to be engaged. And so we invite you all to be engaged in your national processes, in the next steps, as has been shared by our experts here today. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we'll see you soon.